Yes, this is Nation of Sleepers. Loz is here. First live session on the TikTok. TikTok's a brand new platform to me, to be honest. I'm a bit older than most people on here, and I've realised now that it's where it's at in terms of being able to reach people, like-minded people, all the Nation of Sleepers people that were waking up. And this is the thing right now with Nation of Sleepers. We have to stick together. We have to make more and more people come awake to exactly what's going on right out here in the UK and the rest of the world. Tonight I'm going to focus on digital IDs. This is going to be a special. I've got many things to talk about, many different subjects, but need to keep it focused on one at a time, otherwise just go running off in tangents. However, you will find that everything is all linked together anyway. I want to start with an idea. Imagine if you wanted to control the world. Yeah, you're a small group of people and you sat around the table in the pub and you think, you know what, we want to control the world. How are we going to get from A to B, where everybody's just completely locked in a pen like animals, controlled, do exactly what they're told, they've got no freedoms, anything else like that? Well, we're actually seeing that playing out right now, and the digital ID is a massive component of that. Don't know why these, people, the elites, whoever it is, wants to control us all. Don't know what they're going to do with us if they actually achieve their goal of controlling everybody. But we can see it playing out firsthand in front of us, and digital ID, that is where it's all going to start from. I mean, we are literally sleepwalking, just like we did with COVID. We're sleepwalking into digital slavery, and there's so many facets to this as well. But I just want to talk to you about how it's going to start with a digital ID and why we need to resist it so wholeheartedly. And the way that we can do that is by talking in forums like this, starting to share these ideas with other people, making sure that we're spreading this word and warning as many people as will listen that, much like with COVID, the digital ID is, a stepping stone towards tyranny, and we need to prevent that from happening. They're going to give you all these different excuses, it's about stopping migrants, it's, saving people from poverty, it's about climate change. It's not. It's a lot darker than that, and history will prove it. Let's have a little think about, the timeline of the UK. And the UK is very different to other parts of the world, even the continent, where the continent, French, the Germans, they've always had ID cards, and there's always been this sort of mentality of show me your papers. We've never done that in Britain. It's not a very British thing to do, and it's not a nice idea to be considering, how you've got your passport or your driver's license. Occasionally someone, like a policeman, might say, can you show me your driving license? But, how many people actually carry them? Not many at all. And certainly we don't have a world in this country where we actually have to show our papers on demand to anybody. But that's exactly where they're wanting to try and get to. So there's only really been 3 key examples of when we've had ID cards in the UK. First one was in First World War, and that was between 1915 and 1919. Now, the reason for that was because at the time, they needed to do this mass conscription to try and get as many people as they could to go over to the Western Front to start fighting against the Germans and to defend and support the Allies, the French and the Belgians. And they realised that they didn't actually know how many fighting men that they had in the British Isles. So they needed to do some sort of a census, and they thought the best way was to get a mandatory registration. And so they basically went out across the country, and all these were just little cards, very basic details. And they were sort of taking the details of all of the fighting age men across the British Isles that they could find. And they built this big register, and it was all held in the local town halls across the country, and obviously they fed that back to Parliament. They found out that there was just over 1.4 million men, and that was great. That was Kitchener's army. Kitchener was the leader of the expeditionary force that went over to France. Once he'd found that information, and then they started mobilisation and conscription for World War One, they kind of lost interest in, the ID component of it, controlling people. They weren't bothered about that. They just needed men to go and fight in the war. And it fizzled out quite quickly, and people would forget the cards or they'd lose them or whatever, and there wasn't really any repercussions. And then, so by the time that the war ended in 1918, everyone had bigger fish to fry, and by 1919, it fizzled out, and that was that. And then During World War Two, 1939, obviously there was a massive pressure to reinstate this again, but there was a bit of a different component. Yes, they were still trying to identify how many men that they had to go to war, but they also needed to understand if there was any potential German spies in the UK. And MI5, the security services of Britain, were really effective at managing to round up all of these potential German spies across the British Isles, and in some part because of the ID cards. But again, they were very basic. They just had a name and certain details that were held in a central repository. So this would help against the fraud aspect. So if I've got a card and it says my name, Loz, on it, they would have in a different office somewhere else my date of birth and address. So the policeman could say, show me your ID, show it them, and say, right, what's your date of birth? And they would know by going back to somebody else and finding out that information. Not doing any co-hosting on this one, unfortunately, but maybe next time. So what they would do then is be able to double check whether or not that ID was valid, whether they'd stolen it, etc. And we'll get onto the fraud aspect of the digital ID soon. But then the other thing that was really clever in World War II was that they linked rationing to the ID card. So if you wanted to go and get your rations of, butter or sugar or any of the sort of staple foods that they were having to import in across the Atlantic, you had to have your ID card as well. And this is almost like a parasitic vitality, is that what that means is that it gave energy and it gave commitment to the use of the ID card because there was another ulterior need for it, the food, the rationing. So if you didn't have your card, you wouldn't get your butter or anything else that was rationed at the time. And so that was probably the only reason why the ID card in World War II was effective. However, this was brought in wartime, and so by the time that the war finished, people were starting to think, right, why have we still got this ID card? Because, the Nazi threats disappeared. This was brought in, we agreed to it as part of war conditions, but we're not at war anymore. And it dragged on all the way until 1952, when it eventually was fizzled out. And what had happened was there was a bit of a mission creep. So initially it was supposed to be, like I said before, for the security services to identify if there was any German spies, to identify whether or not there was people that were avoiding fighting in the war, or if people needed it for rationing. But then all of a sudden different government departments started saying, oh, can I use it for this and can I use it for this? And before you knew it, everybody was using the ID cards, and people felt massively frustrated with this. Motorists were getting pulled over, show me your ID card. So eventually there was a bit of a backlash against it, and in 1952 it was scrapped. And that was that. The British people aren't particularly keen on ID cards. We like to just be left alone, get on with our business. And because of British common law, essentially anything that's not explicitly prohibited is allowed. And so why do we need ID cards? Why do we need all this draconian rules? It reared its ugly head again in 2006, and this was the last days of the Labour government. Labour's important because Tony Blair is rearing his ugly head again, talking about being involved in promoting the digital ID right now. So at the last stages of that Labour government, which led us to war in Iraq and all these other disastrous policies that caused so much trouble, which we're now feeling the repercussions of with the mass migration, etc., he was really pushing for the ID cards, and they nearly got it in. And they actually brought in 2006, it was the ID Cards Act, and they were essentially going to make it mandatory, although it was mandatory only for certain people to have an ID card. This is really important as well, because when we get onto the digital ID, how are they going to make the people that they don't even know are in the country? Really important as well, because when we get onto the digital ID, how are they going to make the people that they don't even know are in the country? And they basically booted out Labour. So in 2010, that whole act was repealed, and that was the last time that they've tried to do it. But Tony Blair is just constantly there in the background trying to make us have the digital ID. And you can go onto his website, the Tony Blair Institute, and it's one of these secretive Bilderberger type think tanks that links into the World Economic Forum, and even some of the reasoning that they've got on there for why it's a good idea to have digital ID cards, talking about like, oh, it's doctor's appointments in Sweden, and I'm looking at the website now, tax returns in Estonia, benefit allocation in India. It's like, great, none of that is relevant at all. So there must be a more nefarious reason why they want to have the ID card, and I'll tell you what it is. So when I was a kid and I was starting to like read into different conspiracies, reading David Icke and stuff as a 16-year-old, used to talk about microchips under the skin. You'd be like, yeah, whatever, that's never going to happen. And obviously you do see that now, like with the one gullible fool who will get one put in his finger so he can open the door or whatever. But that is the next iteration of the digital ID. And those ID cards that we've just discussed earlier on, they're iterations of, just this control mechanism. Digital ID is going to be the next one. And then after that, if they were successful, it would probably be a microchip. And then it'll be like, an implant in your brain, the Neuralink that our saviour Elon Musk's always talking about, the human AI interface. And these are the stepping stones, which is where it's going towards if we allow the digital ID to happen. Because going back to the original point, what would they do if they wanted to control us all? Well, they've got to control the money. Because if they take away your money, then you don't have any freedom to be able to do anything other than what they let you do. And what we're seeing right now, first of all, it was like the gimmick of NFTs and crypto, but now it's like, central bank digital currencies. The digital currencies are getting rolled out, the removal of cash, it's cashless society, and COVID was a big part of this as well. It's the cashless society is conditioning us to be more reliant on chip and pin, and then eventually it's going to be your finger with your implant in it, and then your brain's just going to think, paying for something at the till. But these are all the stepping stones, and obviously a digital ID is a component part of digital currency because they control your freedom to earn, your freedom to save, your freedom to buy whatever you want. Then all of a sudden you're constricted, aren't you? And that then ties into the freedom of movement. Because if you don't have money and also you've got this mass surveillance state that's watching your digital ID saying, oh, he's strayed out of his 15-minute city, I can see him on all these multiple cameras, then they're going to be able to control you, and maybe they'll even penalise you and take some credits off you. Or, if you're being a good boy or girl, maybe they'll give you a little bit of extra, maybe they'll let you, go to the doctors twice in a month rather than once. And it's all just this control mechanism. And I used to think to myself when you'd see, them putting up the 3G masts and then knocking them down and putting the 4G masts up and then knocking them down and putting the 5G masts up. It's like, why would the government, be so bothered about giving us really fast Wi-Fi? They wouldn't, because they don't care about doing anything else for us. But the 5G isn't about like giving us Wi-Fi or, the ability to watch YouTube on the move. It's because it needs that digital infrastructure to be able to control the digital prison, which they're essentially creating for us. And, also on top of that now, if you can control people's freedom of speech, the online safety bill, all of this stuff that you're seeing in the news now about freedom of speech, people putting tweets out and getting arrested, maybe even me doing this live now, I might get a knock on the door from the police saying, oh, you're saying things that we don't agree with. And you could just see the inevitability of all of this rolling out if they have their way. And it's inevitable that it's going to happen unless we do something about it. And the quickest way that we can stop this is by saying absolutely vehemently, no, we're not going to accept the digital ID. Because it's provable that they're not going to be able to target the people that they're saying this is for. Because in the past they've talked about it being to prevent terrorism. That's bullshit. Then they've talked about it being to stop, climate change or benefit fraud or, digital online ID or, teenagers accessing porn. It's all they're just coming up with as many ideas as possible, hoping that one of them's going to stick. But unfortunately, we've seen that with COVID, haven't we? Because COVID essentially was the test. Now, think back all those years ago to COVID. Do you remember when you were able to go into certain pubs and you could buy like some beer, but only if you bought a meal? And, you just be like, okay, well, I'm going to buy a pint, but I'm going to have to buy some chicken wings. and no one would eat the chicken wings because you just wanted the beer. But do you remember when you first went into the pub, you'd have to write your name and address or whatever on like a little chit and then throw it in a box? And then that developed onto the QR code. And if you didn't do that, you'd have like the good boys and girls on the door or on the bar saying, oh, sorry, you're not allowed in because you've not filled in the details or you're from out of area. This again was all conditioning. It was to get us used to being told what to do, to show who we are, and then, being compliant, but also with a penalty if we didn't adhere to it. And so the COVID scam was a test for this, and they even called it the COVID vaccine passport, didn't they? Because what they were trying to do is just get us conditioned to the idea that we do what we're told, we make sure that we're always prepared to show our papers, and if we don't be good boys and girls, we're not allowed to go on holiday, we're not allowed to go on a flight, we'll lose our jobs, we lose our freedom, i.e. lockdowns. And all of this is just the inevitability, because if they had the digital ID and it was linked to a digital currency and it was linked to, behaviour charts, all of which can be monitored through surveillance, you've just got no chance, have you? Because especially when half the country turned on the other half of the country as well, and everyone was screaming like, you're an anti-vaxxer, you've not got a mask on, you've not had 10 jabs. That will be exactly the same if the digital IDs come in, because there'll be a certain section of the population who will be just suckered in hook, line and sinker in terms of why we need to have the digital ID, and they'll be the ones that will turn on those of us that reject it. And so we have to be mindful that will probably happen. We'll be called anti-ideas or something. And I think that really we just have to be so careful and understand exactly why they're trying to bring in the digital ID, who's going to benefit from it, and then what it will lead to if it happens. So let's think about Blair a little bit more. And we know that Blair is involved because he's in the news at the moment, and he pops up every so often and sort of starts talking about, oh, we need to do this, I'm going to save the Middle East. I'm pretty sure you're the guy that destroyed it. But now he's popped up talking about digital IDs, and this was one of his little babies from back in 2006 when he did the Digital ID Act and almost got it through. But then fortunately, through some fate of God, it got repealed in 2010. So even though that the government is going to tell you every day it's to save you from this, it's to protect you from this crisis, problem, reaction, solution, do not believe it, because when they say to you that the digital ID will make your life easier, that's only because they're going to put barriers up for every other aspect. If they say that it will cut fraud and benefit abuse, just remember that the previous examples of when we've had ID cards in this country, there has been massive historical proof that they were used for criminality. And there will be certain people who will be able to pass themselves off as someone else and use the other person's ID card to be able to get access to extra services or extra goods. So the idea that it's going to cut out fraud and benefit abuse is like absolute bullshit. And we can see that already. Literally, as soon as they brought in the online safety bill and they said that, everybody has to prove their age of 18 before they can access certain websites, well, the kids were smarter and they were able to access VPNs and get around it literally in a heartbeat. So there's absolutely no way that any system that one man has designed is going to be able to be stopped from being abused or corrupted or hacked by another man. And this is what we need to remember, that the government can't be trusted with our data when it comes to the NHS and, the Chinese hacking the NHS and stealing all our data. So if they were able to somehow get this digital ID across the line and we've all got it and they're sat on this massive government database, what was it that happened really recently? Oh, I remember. It was someone from the MOD who released the names of, 15,000 potential Afghan helpers of the British military to the Taliban. Literally sent them the database. Are you telling me that the government is not infallible enough to release all that data, or that there's not hacking groups nefarious enough to try and steal that data for some other reason? So on the very basis alone of data protection, you have to say no to the digital ID, because there is no way that they're going to be able to protect your or my data. And so when they say that, bullshit. And when they say it's going to stop illegal migration, bullshit. Because they don't even know who half these migrants are that are coming across the channel. They don't even know where half of them are in the UK. So how are they going to find them? Well, they're not. They're not going to even bother targeting them. What they're going to do instead is just come after me and you and anyone who's already on the voters roll, or anyone who's already on the HMRC system, or anyone who's already got a passport or a driver's license. I'm going to say, you have to have this new digital ID or else. And this is where I was saying about the or else's will be. And you only have to look at China for this, really, because China's almost like a test case for what is going to happen in the West and in the UK if we allow it to happen. They have what's called a social credit score system, whereby they have this mass surveillance system, much like we're getting in the UK, all provided for by the infrastructure of 5G, 6G, whatever it's going to come to. And essentially, if somebody's like designated area or operation is a particular town or a particular location, and they're not allowed to stray 15 minutes outside of that bubble, if they do, they might get penalised. And it's much like this alert system that they're doing over the weekend. You know, if you gave the government the ability to just shock you with your phone going off every 5 minutes because they want to tell you something or they want to control you in another way, I guarantee that they're going to want to do it because they're power crazy lunatics. And then they're going to start sending you a text because you've eaten too many crisps. Or they're going to say to you, hey, we've noticed that you've had 10 pints this week and you're only supposed to have 8. So we're going to take off your, universal basic income for the next month. And this is exactly where it'll go to if you allow the people to take control of your life through a digital ID. Because a digital ID will link up with a digital currency. And we already know that AI is literally going to take shitloads of jobs in the near future. So how are they going to make sure that people have money? Well, they'll probably give out some sort of universal basic income, and that'll be controlled through the digital ID. And so then if all of a sudden you've got to sit there like a good boy or girl because the government is now funding you, the only money you have access to is the money that the government is giving you, and they say to you, oh, by the way, we might have to cut off some of your money if you misbehave or say something that's flagged up on Facebook, or you stray too far from where you should go. Oh, and remember those holidays you used to have? Even the cheap ones on EasyJet, they're not going to happen anymore. Maybe we'll give you one every 10 years if you're really, really good. And so it's just an absolute scam to say that the digital ID is anything other than what is going to be benefit for us. Migrants without papers are not going to sign up on an app no matter who says that they're going to. And at the end of the day, when they say that the only way it works is if every single one of us signs up, then that means that let's not just do it then. Because how are they going to control it? They can try and do it digitally. We can clearly see that they haven't got enough police to sort of have checkpoints everywhere. So the only way that they'd be able to control this digital ID system would be through the pocket. And, if they're able to do the digital currency as well at the same time, then it's highly likely that that's exactly what they're going to want to do. So watch this space for some more bullshit reasons as to why a digital ID is required. Watch this space for the digital ID being linked to something which is the parasitic vitality. The only way that they will make you and me want to use a digital ID is if it's linked to something really important like the universal basic income, or some sort of rationing like we saw in the Second World War, because we're not going to do it otherwise, are we? So it's going to be a massive carrot and stick coercion operation, to try and get us to going to keep sort of crushing us until we agree to it. But let's just not agree. So let's have a little bit of a Q&A now, and I'll go through some of the questions and, if anyone's put any on. At the end of the day, would you trust the government, the same government who lost all of your NHS data, would you trust it with data on your identity? If they can't stop the boats from crossing the channel, do you really think that they're going to be able to catch these immigrants and, give them IDs? Or is this all just about controlling the rest of us? So let's have a look if anyone's... See, quite a few people have joined. hopefully you've enjoyed listening to what we're saying. And if anyone's got any questions or thoughts or comments, let's hear them now, because at the end of the day, this is about us all coming together and trying to work out how to prevent this from happening. We've got to make sure that the digital ID absolutely doesn't come into effect. And if we're just thinking about in context of, how we've had IDs in the past, we know that we've had one in the First World War, we know that we've had one in the Second World War, and we know that Blair was trying to push it through in 2006. And so what we need to do is make sure that we can learn from the past, learn from history, and understand how they're going to try and manipulate us again and again and again to do exactly what they want. So Craigie82's just asked, what's Nation of Sleepers? So Nation of Sleepers is exactly that. We are a nation of sleepers. We've been sort of pushed to sleep for so long, coerced and, prevented from actually seeing the truth about what's going on in the world. And so this channel is all about trying to identify how the government, how the elites are corrupting us, how they're trying to manipulate us, how they're trying to keep us sleepwalking into this tyranny, which is clearly happening. And that's why tonight the live is just talking about the digital ID. But if you go onto my channel on here or the YouTube channel, you see all the other videos that we're talking about. And it's literally looking at this madness that's going on in the world right now and seeing just things that are undescribably incomprehensible. There's no way that you can make sense of stuff unless it's part of an agenda, to try and crush us, to try and manipulate us. And we need to see through this bullshit, and we need to awaken as many people as possible. And, then that way we're all united. And this isn't about any sort of weird extremist sort of patriotism, because my total view on this is that if we're British, and it doesn't matter about your race or ethnicity, if you're British and you want to be part of the solution, we do it together. We make sure that we're all in this and we all look after each other, and we don't allow them to divide us, because if we're divided, we can be destroyed. If we're united, they haven't got a chance to do anything to us. So we just need to make sure that we're always sticking together and, keep moving forward as one. So on that note now, I'm just going to have a look through some of the messages here, and I can see that there's quite a few coming through. If there's any other questions, that is about a good time now for us to wrap it up. And just remember, digital ID is something that's so important for the elites to be able to manipulate and control us. And I want really everyone to go away from this knowing that the digital ID is the one thing that we have to resist, and we have to continue to resist with all our might. And, if you get other people talking to you about how a digital ID is a good thing because it's going to prevent terrorism, or it's going to, stop the boats coming across the channel, or it's going to prevent benefit fraud, or it's going to stop anyone from, being able to misuse the system. It's absolute bullshit. The digital ID is designed purely as a control mechanism. It links in with the digital currency, which they also want to bring in, and the social credit system and the 15-minute cities, and it's all designed by the elites to try and trap us like animals in a pen. And if we do not prevent this from happening, that is exactly how our future is going to lay out. So we always have to make sure that we keep ourselves informed, and if we hear any other information, we need to be able to share that with as many people as possible. Because if we don't stick together, if we allow ourselves to be divided because of their constant manipulations, their constant crises, their constant fear, we are literally going to sleepwalk right into their trap. And it is a trap. Everybody can see. Everybody who's got a clear brain can see, whether it was COVID, whether it was, all of the other scams that have come down the line over the years, that the government does not give a shit about us. Anything that it says it's doing for our benefit is a lie. You only have to look at Angela Rayner, the Housing Secretary, and also the Deputy Prime Minister, and how she has increased stamp duty for everybody else in this country, crushed farmers, took money from, all of the old people and, been part of this government which has allowed all of those Labour principles to be destroyed, whilst at the same time scamming her own constituents so that she could save 30 grand on a third house. So it's not only does she have her house in Ashton, Greater Manchester, which is supposed to be her primary residence where her constituents live, but she also has a Grace and Favour home in the Admiralty in London, and then she's just bought an 800 grand home in Brighton and Hove. This is the girl that they champion as the working class northern woman who's the saviour of Labour. She's got her nose so deep in the trough as much as the rest of them. So if that's a representative of our government, please do not ever be fooled into thinking that they have our interests at heart. They do not. So when you hear about these digital IDs or, in the papers saying, oh, it's a really good way of combating benefit fraud or combating terrorism or combating immigration, please do not be fooled by it. And if you need to research further, get into it. There's enough information out there to show why historically the British people have never accepted digital ID, why it's only the nefarious people that are trying now to push it really, really hard on all of us, and why if we allow it to happen, it will literally be game over. There will be no way back if they get the digital ID on us. And we need to make sure that absolutely what we do is fight this with all of our vigour. Do not be distracted. I know that there's lots of other stuff going on in the world, and I know that there's lots of ways that we can be sucked this way and sucked that way, but it's all sleight of hand. And you see magicians, how they do sleight of hand. That's exactly what they're doing by distracting us, whether it's with, getting one lobby to fight against another lobby, getting one religion to fight against another religion, creating inter-ethnical rivalries in the UK. While we're so focused on attacking each other, they're slipping this on, and the digital ID will not be something that we can come back from. Take that away from tonight, and thank you everyone that's listened. Thank you everyone that's sent me these little coin things, and if you've enjoyed it, please follow my channel, look at some of the other videos, and let's spread the word and let's keep things moving forward.